Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Yves Tiberghien, the Director of the Institute of Asian Research, and it's a great pleasure, great honor to welcome all of you here. And first of all, to welcome our guests who mostly flew yesterday from Japan, at least for 3 of them. One is in residence longer this year, and actually 4 of them. Even Ambassador Joseph Caron also just flew back. And all of us were exchanging email at 4 a.m., which shows that there was lots of jet lag in the room. So this event is part of the series of IR on leadership change and the transformation in East Asia. So you can expect more events. We'll continue tracking this transformation of governance policymaking under Prime Minister Abe in Japan, but we'll continue as well to have events on China, on Korea, also when the Indonesian election happens next year, and other important events, we'll continue tracking them. The Indian election will also happen. I want to also flag that we'll have a major other event on Japan on November 1st, a Friday afternoon, thanks to the support of the Consulate General. We have a very prominent professor from Todai, another one, Professor Takahara Akio, specialist on Chinese politics, one of the best Japanese specialists on China, who will come here thanks to the support from Consul General. And I think he's also going to Ottawa and Toronto, right? It's part of a tour to Canada. So it'll be a great honor and pleasure to have him. So do come back. I also want to signal that we have a particular event to celebrate. One of the members here, while he was flying yesterday, was elected by his faculty meeting at Todai to full professor, and that's Professor Yu Uchiyama. So it was en route. So he will be associated with good memories now forever with UBC, and that's part of his long-term relationship. In addition, I must add to a very old friendship we met when I was doing my first field work in Japan way back when in '99. So it's a great, great honor. So I won't say much more. I just want to say that we are dealing with quite a remarkable story in Japan. What remarkable change over a year. What remarkable comeback in terms of Prime Minister Abe himself, who is coming back for the 2nd time. We'll cover those themes. We should also signal that this is happening just at the time when it was announced that Prime Minister Harper will visit Japan later this month. And I'll let Ambassador Caron to talk about this. So we have a great story and a lot of facts and lots of forces to analyze today. And I'm now turning over the floor to Ambassador Caron, who is our chair. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank Yves and the Institute for inviting me to chair today's panel, the official title of which is Japan is Back, Abe Government, Abenomics, and Abe Foreign Policy after the Upper House election. I'd like to set the scene for the discussion today based on an article that appeared yesterday in the New York Times, one by Martin Fackler, which some of you might have read. He describes the plans, which have been in place for a number of years, to move the Tsukiji fish market very close to the Ginza, which I'm sure many of you know, from that location to Toyosu, which is an artificial island in Kotoku, not very far away. This has been long mooted. The basic objective has been to cash into the high real estate value of downtown Tokyo, and also further modernize Tokyo's center. But that's only part of it. The decision is interesting and relevant to today's discussion because, first, it reflects changing economic structures in Japan. It reflects the transformation of wholesale and retail businesses that have been heavy on mom-and-pop shops in favor of more supermarket chains and more efficient distribution networks. It results from pressure to lower the costs to restaurants and the distribution system that has used products from Tsukiji. It concerns about the environment because it crowds a lot of trucks into the center of the city. And of course, it neatly dovetails now with the decision in Buenos Aires for Japan to host the Olympics in 2020, leading to infrastructure development, including in this part of the city. But it also means giving up some traditional social and economic functions that defined central Tokyo. And interestingly, it's also a reflection of generational change. For those of you who've been to Tsukiji, you'll know that there are what are called the middle wholesalers, the people who hawk the fish and seafood and indeed even vegetables and fruit products when you visit there. They had been originally opposed to this proposal when the then governor Ishihara Shintaro had proposed it, and now they're in favor of it, which I think is significant. I think it's emblematic, in other words, of the kind of transformation that Japan has been to some extent resisting and which PM Abe now wishes the country to embrace. There are costs to this, and they include changes to the social order from those of post-war Japan, with its alternatively dynamic and also very charming balance between modernization and the retention of pre-war community and rural values, to one which will have to be slimmed down in fiscal terms, in regulatory terms, in bureaucratic terms, to meet the competitive realities of the global economy. Now, it remains to be seen whether Abe will have the political skills necessary to even achieve part of his agenda. He certainly won't succeed if important players in the economic communities, the social communities, and those sectors do not support some sort of momentum for change and instead limit Abe's approach to the hortatory, as indeed was the case in the last years of Koizumi. That said, we'll no doubt hear from our panelists that Prime Minister Abe is very much on a roll. I think Yves' remarks also reflect that. Few prime ministers in any democracy have had the advantage of a dress rehearsal when they can clear out the kinks in their performance, as Abe did in 2006 and 2007, and then get a second chance, facing a population that is anxious, if not for change, at least for a government that can address some of Japan's chronic problems. Now, to address this in detail, we have a superb collection of experts with us this afternoon. The way we will progress, if everyone agrees, is there will be alternatively 10 to 15-minute presentations, longer ones from our guests who flew over from Tokyo yesterday, partly to keep them awake. And I will introduce each one of them individually just before they are to speak. I'm telling our panelists that after about 10 minutes, I will signal 10 minutes is completed, and then I leave it to you to try to keep it within 15 minutes. I'll certainly get up and jump around if we see. The objective, of course, is already 4:10, is to have about 20 to 30 minutes for a question and answer period at the end. And there will be a light reception, I understand, after the panel, so you'll have other chances to pose questions to individual members of the panel. So without further ado, allow me to introduce the first panelist. I've already had to change the biographical note here because Dr. Utsuyama, you, until a few minutes ago, so he's still in social but not for long. In the political science and political science department at the University of Tokyo. He was former associate professor at Tokyo Metropolitan University, as well as visiting scholar at MIT and at the School of Oriental and African Studies in the University of London. Obviously, a very eminent academic background. He is going to provide us a sense of the differences between Abe 2 and Abe 1. Use that.
My name is Yu Uchiyama. I would like to express my deep gratitude to Professor Tverian, all my colleagues, and everyone here. Today, I'm going to talk about comparison between Abe 1 and Abe 2. The title is Lessons from the Past, Comparing the First and the Second Abe Cabinets. As you know, he became the Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe became the Prime Minister in 2006 for the first time. Then he emphasized that he would take over the torch of the structural reforms from his predecessor, Junichiro Koizumi. But the first Abe cabinet didn't succeed in implementing the reforms. In contrast, Abe became the prime minister for the second time last December, as you know. The second Abe cabinet seems to have been doing quite well so far, as exemplified by the victory of the LDP in the upper house election held in last July. What made Abe a successful leader this time? What did Abe learn from his previous experiment? What kind of risks does Abenomics, Abe's economic policy, Abenomics involve? This question I'm going to deal with. Now, why did Abe fail in his first cabinet? Koizumi and Abe contrasted. Neoliberalism set the basic tone for economic policy in the Koizumi administration. As you know, Koizumi was the prime minister from 2001 to 2006. During his tenure, a series of structural reforms were implemented, like fiscal reform, privatization, regulatory reform. Abe took over the prime ministership from Koizumi in 2006. And then, neoliberal reforms were still at the core of the agenda on economic policy under the first Abe administration. But the pace of the reform slowed down considerably. For example, tax revenues earmarked for road construction, in Japanese, 道路特定財源 is the best case. Abe failed in incorporating them the general budget. And the basic policy statement in Japanese, 骨太の方針, the case is the good case too. Unlike Koizumi's, it lacked concrete numerical targets. So, why did Abe fail in these reforms? The main reason is that the top-down style of leadership that had been characteristic of Koizumi did not work successfully for Abe. Koizumi was able to exert strong leadership because the institutional sources of power available to Prime Minister dramatically increased by the reforms in the 1990s. The first is the electoral reform. It introduced SMD, single-member district, and proportional representation system, and therefore the Prime Minister's power to endorse candidates came to carry enormous weight. And the second is the central government reforms. They strengthened the core executive, that is, the structure that assists and supports the Prime Minister. And it should be noted that Abe has the same kind of resources as Koizumi. However, an institution's effect can vary depending on how they are used. Particularly important is the power to sanction individuals who do not follow the Prime Minister's line. To the extent that the Prime Minister uses this authority effectively, he or she is able to exercise firm control of the cabinet and the party. Koizumi often took disciplinary action as displayed as his dispatch of assassin candidates, in Japanese, 刺客, to the electoral districts of lawmakers who rebelled against the postal legislation. But Abe seldom took disciplinary action. Rather, he reinstated the postal liberals in the party. So, in sum, Koizumi's leadership was exclusive, while Abe's leadership was accommodative. So, the differences in leadership styles produce differences in the effectiveness of institutional resources of power through impacting the perceptions of the members of the organization. To the extent that the members realize that sanctions will be readily applied, control becomes more effective. So, Koizumi's acts such as assassin tactics considerably raise the members' subjective probability that the sanctions would be invoked. Conversely, if the likelihood of disciplinary action is perceived to be low, it becomes difficult to maintain effective control. So, Abe's acts, such as allowing the postal rebels to rejoin the party, lower the subjective probability. Thus, Zoku politicians became more likely to resist the prime minister. Along with stagnation in reforms, a scandal concerning the national pension hit Abe. So the LDP, Liberal Democratic Party, was severely defeated in the upper house election held in July 2007, and Abe finally resigned in September that year. In contrast to his first cabinet, now Abe keeps enjoying high popularity. So this is the figure. So the blue line is the approval rate of second Abe cabinet. It's still high. It's well over 50%. And for the first cabinet, while the approval rates were considerably high just after his inauguration, they steeply dropped as time passed. For the second cabinet, Abe is still popular enough. Probably for this point, Professor Nybred will talk about it. And this is mainly because of the good economic situation. So, this is the approval rate figure. So, violet one is first Abe cabinet's approval rate. It's steeply low, but for the second term, it keeps considerably high. And this is the economic figure. This is the Nikkei stock average, and so it means our average stock prices, or it's getting higher and higher. And the annual growth rate for the first and second quarters of the 12-13 are 4.1 and 3.8 respectively, beating other major industrialized countries. And as I said, the stock prices have been rising. So this good economic performance is mainly due to the Abenomics, or Abe's economic policy. And Abe's economic policy have three arrows. The first arrow is the monetary policy. So the massive quantitative easing was introduced by the new governor of the BOJ, Mr. Kuroda, who was appointed by Abe. And the second arrow is a fiscal expansion, such as spending on public works. For example, Abe launched the emergency economic stimulus package of 10 trillion yen just after his inauguration. And the problem is the third arrow. Third arrow is so-called the growth strategy, Japanese Seicho Senryaku. It's still on the way. That strategy includes neoliberal reforms like deregulation in the fields of agriculture and medicine. But such reforms have not been implemented yet. This means that Abe prioritized monetary and fiscal policies over structural reforms. Why did Abe emphasize monetary and fiscal policies first? My guess is that monetary and fiscal policies are unlikely to make enemies. Everyone can get benefits from that policy. In contrast, forcing structural reforms is likely to cause division among the LDP members and its supporters. For example, the farmers and related politicians, so-called agricultural zoku, Norinzoku, were opposed agricultural deregulation. In the same way, doctors were opposed the medical deregulation. So, Abe shifted the center of gravity from structural reforms, as in his first years, to monetary and fiscal policies that were less likely to cause division in the LDP. I think it's what Abe learned from his first government. And in addition, Abe's style of governance has changed too. Now, in the first cabinet, he just pushed his agenda, like educational reforms. But this time, Abe seems to know how to pull back, how to compromise. And he now respects senior politicians, like boss of factions. But there are some risks. Abenomics involves some risks. First, to what degree will the third arrow be implemented? Abe's accommodative leadership, as I mentioned before, might not work well for the third arrow, growth policy. And the success of Abenomics depends on people's expectation. For example, stock prices rise because everyone expects higher stock prices. If everyone expects lower prices, they will drop. So, people's expectations may fall if an effective growth strategy is not implemented. The second is concerning the fourth arrow. Economic and Fiscal Policy Minister Amari referred to the Olympics in 2020 as the fourth arrow of Abenomics. So we Japanese are so excited we will host the Olympics in Tokyo. But the government is planning to increase expenditure for the Olympics, and increasing expenditures for the Olympics will compromise fiscal reconstruction policy. Now, as you know, the Japanese government has a huge budget deficit and huge debt. So it will rise the interest rates steeply, and it may hinder the economic growth. It's a second risk. And thirdly, diplomatic relations with East Asian countries may be under more tension if Abe undertakes the amendment of Constitution, especially Article 9. Maybe Professor Kojo will talk about it. It would be a stumbling block to the FTA between Japan, China, and South Korea, or the RCEP. So we should watch how Abe will manage these risks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our second speaker is our director of the Institute of Asian Research, almost everyone here at Abenomics. He's also, for those who don't know, professor of political science, broad area of expertise and interests, including G20, global public goods, financial regulations. He's going to talk about that. And he'll provide additional thoughts on Abenomics, the third arrow, and TPP.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Caron. So actually, my talk just piggybacks very nicely on the previous one, and is drawing on two experiences that I've just had recently. I was for 2 months visiting professor at Todai in the School of Public Policy, teaching about global governance in June and July. It proved to be very difficult. There was not that much interest into global governance compared to other countries, except in TPP. TPP is a focal point at this point. The second experience is I'm just back from the G20 in St. Petersburg, and I had a chance to interact with the Japanese delegation to even ask 2 of the public questions in the Q&A sessions. So I'll draw a bit on that experience to reflect how Abenomics has been presented at the G20 and its interactions there. So I've organized my thought about just around 2 themes. The first one is the big change and the big boost in governance, the few strengths that now the Abe government has. And then, like I'll emphasize a few risks and how they can be managed. So the big sense that was really striking in Japan for someone who has done research on economic policy, structural reforms for 15 years, I found an amazing sense of consensus and actually excitement among the elite, both the private sector, bureaucrats, both Métis and MOF. There's a sense of optimism, things are happening, and quite a lot of other observers. So there is excitement about stable governance after years of unstable governance and twisted diet. There's also excitement because of the big monetary policy boost, the reduction in the yen and the stock market boost. So there was an immediate impact, in visibility, at least for some people. It didn't trickle down to every people and not in every region, as David Hedgington has pointed out this morning. So that's number one. For the first time in years, one party has strong majorities in two houses. We must add, however, that the upper house majority is only qualified. It's together with the Kometo. So LDP and Kometo have 56% there, but not the LDP alone. So it's not a full majority. We'll hear more in a minute from Professor Machidori. So Abe has found a winning formula on the economic side for at least the last 6 months. After years of a very tiring sequence, right? The public has been exhausted going over a roller coaster, right, of no reform, lots of pain, and social dislocation, social movement, a social twist under the Democratic Party, and then now a formula with 3 arrows that seems to give promise and hope. So that's a big thing after those years. We must also emphasize the great disappointment of the DPJ, which is visible everywhere. Everyone says, this hasn't worked. In part because there were such big hopes in 2009, right? The DPJ promised a lot, and there was a sense of hope. That hope sort of was disappointed. And Abe struck very big, big results up front. The biggest being on the appointment of Kuroda at the BOJ, who is both someone we supported, is very active, inflation targeting, proactive monetary policy, but also someone who is very respected globally as a international bureaucrat of high stature. And Abe then quickly obtained support from the G8, G20 from his yen and monetary policy, and then moved quickly on the TPP. So there was a sequence of moves which was very smart and very effective. So we see corporate confidence, and now we see after the upper house victory, the Olympic victory. So it's a series of victory like Japan has not experienced in at least a decade, possibly more. And finally, also, Abe has some strong voices around him in economic management. People like Professor Hamada from Yale, but also Minister Amari has proved very effective. And of course, the Kambochoka and the Chief Cabinet Secretary Suga. So there's an effective team with some interesting debate going on the economic side. So that's what we see in front of us at the moment. But there are bottlenecks and risks. And I want to add to what Professor Uchiyama just said. On the first arrow, the risk here is how far can you go until you start seeing the bond yields go up, until you have pressure on the long-term interest rates, and eventually inflation, right? So there is risk. It's untested. It's the policy push by people like Krugman and Bernanke, but how far do you go? It's untested territory, right? And so there is a bit of uncertainty around there. Still, that's a necessary boost at this moment. On the second arrow, there is, of course, the fact that we have a fiscal ceiling. We have a debt over GDP that's about 220% is going up again this year. That's the highest in the developed world. So, again, there is a limit. Since you have space, you have savings, most of the bonds are bought domestically, nearly 95%, gone down a little bit to 92%. But you have space, you just don't know how far you can go. And you need to keep the confidence of the markets, both domestic, big institutional investors, and a few outside investors who have bought, who have 2 holes in the bond market. And so that constrains. And you could see that palpable tension at the G20. You found on one hand, Asso giving an interview to Financial Times just before the G20 saying, we'll go ahead with the hike in consumption tax as voted by NODA. And then at the G20, the official position was, well, the decision will be later in October. We're evaluating both sides. So there is a lot of to and fro. And what we know is that while Finance Minister Asso is for keeping the consumption tax hike, Kambochoka and Suga is against it, and others are hesitant. So there is, again, an announcement just came out on this saying that they will go ahead, but they will balance this with a strong fiscal stimulus. That all this involves risk and how far you can go with the winning streak on the fiscal side. Now that gets me to the third arrow on structural change. Everyone agrees that you won't get very far in the growth side if you don't have a more active third arrow, the structural change. But unfortunately, the low-hanging fruits were already caught by previous Prime Minister, Hashimoto, Obuchi, and then Koizumi. And so the real choices to move the growth path on the structural side are actually painful. And some of the options that the team has looked at is things like having a law allowing layoffs, which Keidanren wants and Japan has never allowed. Do you go this far, right? Do you bite this bullet or not? So far, in the first 6 months, they decided not to do it, especially not before the upper house election. How far do you go in the privatization on the medical side? How far do you go with the autonomy of special economic zone, etc.? How far do you go in confronting the farmers and other interest groups using the TPP also as a leverage or boomerang to push structural change? And here the frontier will come this fall. What I was told I met at the MITI, the Director General in charge of that, Third Arrow, and he confessed that in fact, what came out in June as a package of 100 pages was a combination of all industrial policy and some leftover Koizumi neoliberal reforms with a sprinkle of the Khan 2010 strategic plan. So they picked up all those ideas that were floating, and it didn't turn into a very coherent package. So that, it's clear that Abe will want to upgrade this and push some strong signals, but how far can it go in the fall and next year? That's up to us, up to see. The formulation of the Third Arrow at the G20 was actually interesting. They emphasized 3 points in the press conference. Number one, utilization of vitality of the private sector. Number two, facilitate the integration of Japan in the global economy. TPP, but also RCEP and the East Asian FTAs. And so there's also here China-Korea FTA mentioned as a goal, and create new global markets while addressing the common concerns of the world on topics like aging society, environmental degradation, and medical technology. So this is where the plan is. Two more bottlenecks before I conclude. One is on Fukushima. We'll all hear about this ongoing Fukushima Daiichi issue, the problem of 1,060 water reservoirs, some of which are leaking, some of which are not sturdy enough for the long term. I think the issue here is simply one of that public-private partnership. You have a private operator that has swallowed risk that's bigger than its size. You have systemic risk, which requires at some point more public money to be solved really. And so far, we haven't seen the amount of public money into this because the voters don't want it. That will really solve once and for all the water crisis that's coming out of Fukushima. So this is a big constraint here. In the short term, it means no nuclear reactors running now. No one can be allowed to run while this Fukushima Daiichi is still ongoing as a crisis. And finally, the whole leadership change, we just heard from Professor Uchiyama, is heavily reliant at the moment on high influx of energy from the Prime Minister himself. He's working very, very hard. He's involved in all files, and a lot of it goes through his leadership. And he's leveraging his strong hawkish image and his strong leader image, which is new compared to Abe 1, in order to push policy. So all this is not totally institutionalized, and that includes, therefore, some risk. It also, I was told, the hawkish image is necessary to push on the economic side, which then in turn creates some risk on the East Asian side. There's not as much freedom to move in a very Nixonian practical way on the East Asian side, while he needs to fight interest groups on the domestic side. So those are the key thoughts I wanted to emphasize. I might conclude by saying that down the line, I still see the Japan-China relation as a key aspect. In terms of pushing the economic growth trend, I think Japan will have to further integrate with China, at least have more economic integration, and that issue is also still a work in progress. There is potential, lots of pragmatisms on both sides. There are potential solutions, but so far they have not been acted upon. In Q&A, I can say more on the TPP or the G20, but I want to give time now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sebastian. Our next speaker is Professor Matsurori Satoshi. He is Professor of Political Science at the School of Government at Kyodai, Kyoto University. His academic background is at Kyodai as well as the University of Wisconsin-Madison. His topic is a note of caution on the role of the upper house. Listen closely to this caution.
Thank you, Ambassador Caron, and it is my great pleasure to come here and gathering to gather a member of great event. And thank you for coming for everyone. And I also I don't have any PowerPoint slide today, and it's a kind of a strategic mistake because without the PowerPoint slide, everyone sees me. So it's a pretty tough situation for me. So in any case, let's start my presentation. The Japanese politics seems to recover its stability as a result of the upper house election, in which the coalition government of LDP and Komeito gains a majority seats. It is unquestionable that the recent political stalemate has largely comes from the fact the governing party has not been majority in the upper house since 2007. What some scholars and journalists point out is that the Japanese politics faces a similar situation of the divided government in the presidential system when the governing party lacked the majority seats in the upper house. As a result of winning the lower and upper house elections consecutively, the LDP and Komeito finally find the era of the divided government in Japan. It has fundamentally a great effect on Japanese politics and policy making. In this context, it is quite natural that many scholars, journalists, and policymakers who watch Japanese politics expect Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will strengthen his leadership. Some believe Abe can successfully conduct the structural reforms, as is already mentioned, or the growth strategies in his economic policy. Others are afraid of the situation in which Abe shows his right-wing lean affects the relationship with China and Korea. Although the directions are different, these views have common understandings and expectation that the Japanese Prime Minister has enough power to decide his or her desirable policies with the majority in both houses. They also seem to fit with the recent development that the Prime Minister became more active and influential actor in Japanese policy-making system. It is necessary for us, however, not to oversimplify Japanese politics. Although the upper house without the governing party's majority has been the truly obstacles, it is also certain that the divided government has been only one of the major reasons of political stalemate. I would like to focus on some questions in this presentation. Do problems related to the upper house really disappear? And if not, why does Japanese politics still have obstacles? When considering the upper house problems, it is quite important to understand institutional structures and the short histories of the upper house. Actually, the upper house has a long history, but my talk is short, very short, so it's a kind of short history, I don't know. Well, whatever. Japan has had a House of Peers as upper house in the pre-war era. After the defeat of the Second World War, the House of Peers abolished with the end of the aristocracy. The occupied nations, American legal officers in particular, believed that Japan should have a unicameral legislature in the new democratic constitution without aristocracy nor the federal system. It fit with the common sense of political institutions in those days. However, constitutional drafters of the Japanese government were afraid of democratic policy-making process based only on the will of the House of Representatives. As a compromise, they proposed a bicameral legislative institution in which the general public directly elected both houses. The cabinet, however, could not dissolve the upper house nor control the timing and cycle of the elections. In addition, they also decided that both houses would have the same power in policy-making process. The upper house was expected to be restrained against the lower house and democracy. Their intent was reflected on the electoral system of the upper house. And in its original design, the upper house members were elected 40% from the whole nation district with a single transferable voting system. And, it's political scientist jargon, the SNTV, and 60% from the prefectural district system with a mixture of SMD and SMTV. SMD is a single-member district system. Like the U.S. Senate, the election held every 3 years to elect half of all members. At the same time, however, the new constitution required that all the members of the Diet should be representatives of the whole Japanese nation. This requirement made the role of the upper house members quite ambiguous. Although they were elected through the mixture of the two kinds of SNTB in which the particularism could be easily dominant, they were expected to be similar roles and have similar powers with the lower house representatives. The ambiguous upper house bothered the cabinet just after the new constitution came into effect in 1947. The Prime Minister, Shigeru Yoshida, one of the most influential prime ministers in Japanese history, often graved over uncontrollability of the upper house. Until 1956, when the LDP gained the majority seats in both houses, the governing party often had to look for the cooperation from the opposition at the conference. Since some members in those days idealized the House of Peers and took non-partisan positions, Yoshida and other prime ministers expected support from them to some extent. As a result of the LDP majority after the upper house election in 1956, the situation seems to be changed drastically. In reality, however, it meant inter-house coordination was transformed into intra-party one. The upper house LDP had its own organization and maintained much autonomy. Along with the high economic growth and extension of governmental roles in the resource distributions, particularism of the upper house LDP strengthened. The LDP leadership, including the Prime Minister, had to take care of their own upper house counterpart as a different party. When the LDP and Komeito lost the upper house majority in 2007, the coordination problem came back from intra-party to inter-party again. It is not quite a new situation because pre-1956 era had been similar. The post-2007 era, however, was different in one significant aspect. As a result of the electoral system reform in 1990s, the party system at the lower house almost transformed two-party competition. DPJ appeared as a major challenger to the takeover of power, governmental power. In this context, DPJ did not have any reason to cooperate with the LDP and Komeito coalition. The same thing was applicable to the era of the DPJ government. In 2009 to 2012. LDP and Komeito did not want to cooperate anything significant because they punished DPJ and expected the takeover of the government. There were no effective routes to make inter-house coordination possible, and divided government gave serious stalemate in Japanese politics. What I described above shows that the upper house problem has deeper roots than in just being the divided government. Rather, it comes from constitutionally ambiguous roles, a strange combination of the national SNTB and the prefectural SMD SNTB combination, and autonomous party organizations. Even in the heyday of the stick keys? I don't know. Is that okay? Okay. Even in the heyday of the LDP predominance, the prime minister and the party executive had to make much effort to assure the consent from the upper house counterparts. This tendency becomes worse when the lower house has two-party competition as a result of the electoral system reform in the 1990s. In addition to these institutional aspects, the upper house election has been used as a tool to request hyper accountability. It is the Ben first used, I guess, of governing party leadership. Every different kind of elections, including the upper house, governors, mayors of big cities, etc., has been regarded as showing the will of voters, the will of people on the central government to criticize LDP predominance. So, although it is quite improper because the prime minister and the government cannot control the timing and agendas of these elections, this view is still remaining, and the governing party's leadership is seen as responsible for winning every election. Here I would like to be back to the Abe administration. It should be pointed out that the institutional and contextual sources of the upper house problem are totally unchanged, even after his consecutive wins, the Diet elections, and the IOC competition. The upper house LDP organization still enjoys the great autonomy. After the selection process of the upper house speaker, just after the election, for example, the lower house LDP leadership headed by Abe confirmed the candidate who was supported by the mainstream members of the upper house LDP. Although the electoral system reform considered the division of labor between two houses are almost untouched. Yes. Many believe that Abe will have golden 3 years without national elections until the summer of 2016. There will be, however, the unified local government elections in the spring of 2015, which might be seen as an opportunity for requesting the hyper accountability of the Abe administration. To make matters worse, it will be shadowed on Abe that the image of the strong premiership comes from the political reforms in the 1990s and the successful experience of the Koizumi administrations, as Uchiyama-san already mentioned. The power of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet has definitely been strengthened by the reform and Koizumi's experience. Currently, Prime Minister is believed to be at the center of the policy-making process. It also means, however, every policy failure and the political miscue will be the source of the criticizing the Prime Minister. In reality, the Prime Minister still does not have enough tools to control the upper house members of the governing parties. There is a great gap between the general expectations on the Prime Minister leadership and the real controllability of the upper house. This gap might matter for Abe when he challenges to difficult policy making. Imagine, for example, the case that Abe tackled with the TPP negotiation. Since it includes open market policies in agriculture and service sectors with relatively low competitiveness, many LDP politicians and supporters will inevitably criticize him. Relatively many members of the upper house LDP are supported by the agricultural and traditional service sectors because the prefectural mixture of SMD and SNTB with malapportionment overly represents the rural areas. Abe and LDP leadership need to go through intra-party coordination processes before sending necessary bills to enforce the TPP agreement to DIA. It might happen some LDP members make ad hoc coalition with opposition parties to block these legislations. Although these members will condemn and sanctioned by party leadership, Abe approval rating will also sharply drop. Then it will active oppositions and media by which the process of hyper accountability begins. So it might be the worst scenario for the Abe administration. Winning the upper house majority definitely makes the transaction cost to coordinate with the upper house lower. Even so, however, there are still hidden political disturbances for Abe which are related to the upper house because institutional problems of the upper house still untouched. While popularity and some personal resources can overcome political obstacles to some extent, it will not have long-lasting effects. As political scientists have found for the last 20 or 30 years, however, institutions always matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Matsudaori. Our next speaker is Dr. Kume Ikuo. He is at the Center for Global Communications, International University of Japan, and he's also affiliated with Waseda University. He has broad interests, labor politics, interest group politics, and analyses of political processes. And he will speak to us about the upper house election and policy issues.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. And my name is Iko Kume. And today I'm talking about Abe's election strategy, focusing on the policy issues. And but let me start with the last December's election result. And as you all know, LDP with Kome Party achieved landslide victory, and this is LDP share of the seat within the lower house, and this 31 is a Kome Party's share. So the combination with the Kome Party, LDP, and Kome governing coalition occupy the supermajority within the lower house. And so this is a big victory that at the time, we have been observing a series of short-lived governments since the first Abe cabinet. So even after this landslide victory, the Abe cabinet could have been, could have suffered from the kind of political crisis or a sudden sea change and toppling him down. So the Abe LDP has been very, very careful not to alienate its fragile, potentially fragile supporters. So the Prime Minister Abe's determination to win the upper house election this summer to consolidate his government was so strong as to be claimed as revenge by himself. And my today's presentation will show you what policy the Abe administration tried to sell to mobilize voters and analyze how successful his tactics was and why, based upon the post-election internet survey conducted by our research team at Waseda. So in pursuit of his second administration, Mr. Abe tried to sell several policies. The first pillar is Abenomics, as the first pillar of this Abenomics is financial policy, both financial policy, and second one is fiscal policy. And third one is growth strategy. So this is an economic oriented policy to be sold by Prime Minister Abe. And the second pillar is a national agenda or foreign policy. The third one, this is a kind of minor one, but TPP. Mr. Abe was very positive in joining the TPP. And some of these policies have soon brought about their effect. And loose fiscal policy, loose financial policy, or at least its announcement, has depreciated yen drastically, and driven stock prices up. So, and Abe's foreign policy or his nationalist agenda has exacerbated China and South Korea, and his pro-TPP stance has irritated the LDP traditional supporters, such as farmers and medical doctors. So among them, the outcome of his economic policy, Abenomics, that is weak yen, and the stock price surge, is a good news for his electoral tactics for the upper house election. But he has to be very careful still in dealing with foreign policy, nationalist issues, and TPP, as these might alienate Abenomics supporters. So in this context, the third arrow of his Abenomics growth strategy, which includes deregulation and the structural reform, has been postponed. And at the time, many pundits or the media argued that these touchy issues or policies should be sidelined, at least until the upper house election. And I remember we had a similar kind of conference here in this room in January. And from the floor, we had one question. If you are an advisor to Prime Minister Abe, what is your advice? And I was first. So I said, oh, well, I didn't have time to think about it. And so I said, oh, maybe go for PPP. But then other people are against me. No, let's postpone until the summer election. Okay? And I think at the time I thought, well, that is very reasonable. The reason why I said go for TPP is because I have been studying TPP and domestic politics, so I'd like to see what's going to happen. So purely political advice, don't go for TPP, should have been a good one. Yeah, but anyway, behind this advice, the idea is that if Abe's LDP with Kome party win majority in the upper house, Prime Minister Abe can eliminate the root cause of recent Japan's political stalemate. Okay? So it is critically important for him to keep momentum until the upper house election. And most people reasonably predicted, and some expected that Prime Minister Abe would follow this advice. This advice is economy stupid kind of advice, a la Bill Clinton. Okay, so the reason is that the nationalist agendas or hawkish foreign policy may alienate Abenomics supporters, and a painful reform should be postponed. So these are the basic reason for this advice. Now, these arguments and advices potentially or implicitly assume that Prime Minister Abe's policies to be solved contain some intrinsic tensions among them. So by which I mean Abenomics supporters who are new in doing so are not so much interested in nationalist agendas, and rather want Mr. Abe to solely focus on economy. And nationalist supporters are not so happy with American-led, free market-oriented TPP. So what I'm trying to say is that there is a kind of internal tension among various policies to be solved by Prime Minister Abe. Okay. And Prime Minister Abe himself, however, did not seem to take this advice seriously enough, as his remarks on Japan's wartime invasion in Asia and his consistent support for TPP show. But he managed to win the upper house election, gaining majority. So what happened? That's my question today. And so the question is, to what extent the assumption behind the advice, it's economy stupid, is empirically supported. So we need to look into the structure of partisan support in current Japan to answer this question. Is there a divide within the LDP supporters? And is there a divide within the Abe's LDP supporters camp, such as economy versus nationalist agendas? So in order to answer this question, I'd like to use the internet survey we conducted after the election. And in this post-election internet survey we conducted which we conducted in July this year, we asked respondents about the weight of 23 policies issues in their voting decision. Those policies issues include economic recovery, this is Keiki Taisaku, and nuclear power, and Senkaku Islands, territorial issues, and constitution, and so forth, so on and so forth. And let me take a look at the result. So, I pick up several important policies: diplomacy, nuclear power, economic recovery, economic policy, constitution, and so on and so forth. And this is the LDP. And these are the major parties. And as you can see, among LDP supporters, economic recovery and economic policy are very important. And also the Senkaku issue and the diplomacy are also very important. And if you compare the policy arena by choosing LDP and BPJ, again you can see the very characteristic feature of LDP supporters. LDP supporters think the economic recovery, economic policy are very important in their voting decision. But they also think Senkaku Island issue and diplomacy are very important. So this is very interesting. So we conducted some statistical analysis, and I found there is one important dimension within this policy interest, and which means that this is so-called the principal component analysis, and we can find that the people who think economic recovery and the measurement to strong yen, and this is another economic policy, and Takeshima, Senkaku, the voters who think these issues are important, tend to support LDP. So the point is that there is no internal tension between nationalist agenda and economic issue. Now, in a sense, Abe was successful in setting up a kind of policy package which includes nationalist agenda and economic policy. How was it possible? Is the second question. And in order to answer this question, the TPP is a very important critical case. TPP, as I explained, could have alienated the Abe supporters. So I conducted some regression analysis, and the no, before regression analysis, go to regression analysis. I conducted the regression analysis, and the outcome is this. And this plus mark means that, for instance, for age, older people tend to support TPP, and income means that higher income people tend to support TPP, and so on and so forth. And now the important finding is that the people say that China's influence on Japan is very large. This kind of view is contributing to the TPP support. So the point is that TPP support is, of course, somewhat based upon the cost-benefit analysis of each voter, but at the same time, the nationalist sentiment or the kind of geopolitical concern is a very important key. Okay. So this is very much interesting, and here I'd like to give some speculation, and actually, I'm not so good at prediction, especially for the future. So, but let me try. And in the heyday of the LDP one-party dominance, catch-up consensus, let's modernize Japan, and Cold War were important factors to consolidate the LDP's hegemony. But now, in the event of LDP's landslide victory and Abe's successful consolidation of power, a sense of vulnerability seems to be very important, which is caused by geopolitical change in Asia. And this may be a factor to consolidate the one-party dominance, second version, especially in the vacuum of effective opposition parties. Okay? Now, this is my speculation, and if you happen to observe the different outcome, decline of LDP, please email me. I'm very good at ex post fact explanation, so I can give you. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kume. Our next speaker is our homegrown colleague, Benjamin Naidad. And Benjamin is faculty associate, at Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions, as well as at the Center for Japanese Research. And Ben's topic is Prime Minister Abe's popularity in comparison to recent prime ministers.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm pleased to be on with such distinguished people on the panel. I'm going to do my best to stay quite short. The purpose of my talk is actually to give perhaps a bit of a broader perspective, both comparative, about the position of the Prime Minister in Japan, both comparative to other parliamentary democracies, developed parliamentary democracies, and how it's evolved over time in Japan. And in particular, how the Abe II administration might fit in with these previous patterns and the changing patterns of the role of the Prime Minister in Japan. I've given half a dozen talks or more on the Japanese Prime Minister over the last 5 or 6 years, and for every talk I've more or less had a new Prime Minister. This is a nice change because yes, there's a new Prime Minister, but at least I talked about him before. So it's a pleasure. But Japan, particularly in the recent decade, has had rather unusual dynamics in the rapid turnover in the position of the Prime Minister. We had 4 straight Prime Ministers who lasted less than a year in office, although 2 of them lasted 364 days. So not barely. And in fact, counting the current Abe administration, there have been 7 straight prime ministers who have not lasted a year and a half, although I think the betting money is on the current Abe administration lasting longer than 18 months. This means that Japan in the 21st century has become number 1 in terms of the number of prime ministers as compared to many other countries, the developed parliamentary democracies. Up until around 2000, Italy was firmly holding the lead, but Japan has surpassed Italy and proudly can say that it has had more prime ministers than any other developed parliamentary democracy. Now, what's distinctive about this, if you notice, there are in fact 3 countries that have had a pretty unusually large number of prime ministers, Italy, Finland, and Japan. Italy and Finland both had a large amount of turnover in the position of the prime minister in the 50s and 60s. And in fact, in recent decades, it's not actually been particularly high in comparative perspective. Japan is pretty much the only country amongst the developed parliamentary democracies to have such rapid turnover of the prime minister within the last 10 years or so. In fact, overall, if you look at parliamentary democracies around the world, prime ministers have lasted in office longer in the 21st century than they did for any previous decade, at least amongst the developed parliamentary democracies. What's distinctive about the turnover in the Japanese prime minister as compared to other countries is, not surprisingly, the number of times the prime minister is replaced with absolutely no change in the partisan composition of government. These are intra-party changes in the position of the prime minister. This happens more than twice as frequently in Japan as anywhere else in the advanced parliamentary democracies. And it is actually just an extremely striking how rare this is in other places, despite recent examples such as Australia and others that we can come up with where it has happened as well. Occasionally going both ways. Anyway, what's interesting about this is that this stands out comparatively, and there's this broader sense that the short tenure of Japanese prime ministers hampers political leadership, creates a short-term focus for political leaders in Japan. They're always looking over their shoulder. They're afraid they're going to be replaced. This makes enacting costly policy change difficult. It creates risks for policy continuity. There are many, many arguments about all these potentially negative consequences of the rapid turnover of prime ministers. I'll get back to the question about the consequences of this and whether it is going, I expect it to continue with the second Abe administration a little bit later. But what I want to highlight is that over time, the sort of turnover of the Japanese prime minister, the position of the Japanese prime minister has changed in the post-war era. I sort of break it down into roughly 5 eras. We have the early, immediate post-war period. We had party system consolidation for most of that period. We had the occupation of Japan. Then we have the early LDP period. And it's fair to say that from roughly 1946 to 72, the position of the Japanese prime minister, while it looked weak institutionally in comparison to prime ministers elsewhere in the world, the overall dynamics of prime ministerial turnover and the relationship that they had to their parties and so forth wasn't particularly exceptional. It's with the institutionalized pattern of LDP rule starting early 1970s that we see the rapid turnover of the Japanese prime minister, typically every 2 years, occasionally more frequently than that. And we see this rapid turnover, with the exception of Nakasone in the mid-1980s, through the second half of the LDP dominance period there. And in the 90s, we see a return to some issues of party system fluidity and the challenges that the prime minister facing related to that. And in the 21st century, I've argued elsewhere that the dynamics of the role of the prime minister have changed dramatically. And in particular, the prime minister's relationship with the Japanese public. Every prime minister in the 21st century, up until Abe too, so we'll get back to this in a moment, has had a dramatic honeymoon. Come in with at least some popularity, and that popularity has dropped like a stone within the first year. Okay? This is dramatically different from what we've seen in the past. Let me just sort of go through quickly some examples here. So regular polling about the popularity of prime ministers and support for cabinet starts in about 1960 in Japan. So we look through the first, I've just taken the first two years of support data for each prime minister, starting with Ikeda. And as you can see, no honeymoon, not much changes. It's pretty flat. For Ikeda, same for Sato. This is actually really boring. Tanaka, we finally get something interesting. Tanaka looks like a 21st century prime minister. I will tell you that right now. Most others don't, however. After Tanaka, we see Miki, not much going on. Fukuda, horizontal, and not particularly popular, but horizontal. Ohira, horizontal. Suzuki, horizontal. I think my titles had said something about dynamics. There are not that much dynamics going on here, right? I mean, and we're getting into the 1980s. Nakasone, mostly flat, slightly rising over time. Takeshita, flat for the first year, then, Uno. I don't need to say anything about Uno. For those of you who remember, yes, Uno. Kaifu, distinctive pattern is, and this we'll see again with Obuchi as well, is actually a dramatic increase over the first year in popular support, which of course is furthered away by Miyazawa, his successor. And this leads you to the 1993 election. And Miyazawa also looks like somebody who started with reasonable popularity and lost it relatively quickly for a number of prominent reasons. Then we start getting our first non-LDP prime ministers, and we see Hosokawa, we start seeing a decline, and then his sort of abrupt resignation. Hata, prime minister for 2 months, not much going on there because, placeholder as the new coalition was being formed. Murayama, flat. We're in the mid-1990s, Hashimoto, flat, in the first couple of years at least. Obuchi, we have that rise again, and we're now finally getting to the 21st century here. And what's happening with every subsequent prime minister is they'd start dropping. So Mori didn't start out with much, but within the first year he'd lost basically all of his support. Koizumi started out with a lot, and he lost, in his first year, half of his support. Going from 80, close to 80% down to 40%, below 40%. Abe, the first Abe cabinet, lost 30 points in support. Similarly, Fukuda lost 25 to 30 points. Also, didn't even take a year for him to lose his support, which, if you listen to his statements, you might understand why. In 2009, we switch and we now have DPJ prime ministers, and they face the same pattern. They all start losing support dramatically. You have this they come in, there are high hopes, and the hopes are dashed. Khan stands out a little bit because the support went back up when he defeated Ozawa for the party leadership again. But again, still, it started at 60, and within a year, his popularity was down to 20. Noda similarly, well above 50 and dropping to 20 by the end of his time in office. So 21st century Japanese prime ministers, at least until Abe II, and I'll get to Abe II, I promise, have had sort of honeymoons. They started with at least some popularity, sometimes quite high popularity, and there's been rapid disenchantment. These prime ministers have faced a large amount of internal party conflict, despite frequently having large, stable majorities in at least the lower chamber. And with the exception of Koizumi, we've seen rapid turnover in the position. And a lot of this, I think, is about the prime ministerial power and being not just about the power of the institution, but the fact that the prime minister rests on parliamentary support and thus indirectly popular support. Prime ministerial popularity gives prime ministers leverage, and this is dramatically much more important now with the institutional changes in the electoral rules and various other things that have gone on in Japan. But unpopular prime ministers are incredibly vulnerable, and this has been in one sense, the key to Abe II is this emphasis on trying to maintain popular support in order to maintain his leverage in office. Abe II, and I'm still waiting for that magical 1 year point to pass so that I can say, aha, it really hasn't, I haven't lost 20 or 30 points in the 1 year. We're not quite there yet, but I'm hopeful. But we haven't seen this drop yet. And the talks by Professor Uchiyama and others have sort of highlighted many of the reasons why this might be the case. But we can think of at least 4 possible answers. Abe learning the lessons from Abe I, the various policy choices in the policy package that was emphasized by Professor Kume. We can also talk about changing voter expectations and the disarray of the opposition. All of these things sustaining the Abe II government in ways that Abe I was not sustained. A few words of caution. I think these echo some of the things I mentioned before. The nature of Abe does face many of the challenges that previous leaders faced, be it the challenges working with the upper house, other things. And the nature of the political problems facing Japan has not gotten any easier. Abe has been able to postpone many of the hard choices, the costly policymaking choices, but he can't postpone them forever. He has the support of a largely inexperienced party backbench, one that's incredibly vulnerable in the upcoming election. And voters in the 21st century in Japan have shown incredible volatility and willingness to support new parties and strong anti-incumbent sentiment. And this makes Abe vulnerable perhaps down the line. However, the die is not nearly as twisted as it has been in most recent years, and Abe does potentially have 3 full years before the next national election, mitigating the risks of this hyper-accountability that was previously mentioned. And he also has the more experience than previous leaders, and so perhaps there is some hope for a window, although for getting effective policymaking done, although I think that window starts shrinking if it doesn't get taken advantage of this fall or at least quite soon. So I'll leave it at that and look forward to the final presentation and the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Nabe. Our final panelist is Professor Kojo Yoshiko, who is Professor of International Relations at the Department of Advanced Social and International Studies at Todai. She's also taught at the Faculty of Law at Kokugakuin University. Her PhD is from the University of Princeton. She, too, has a broad array of interests, including relations between international economic interdependence and institutionalization of international society, and closer to home, how international economic interdependence has transformed domestic politics, primarily in Japan. And I think we will hear about that because her topic is the broad one of Japanese foreign policy. So, Professor Kojo, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm very pleased to be here to have this good opportunity. And so I made the same mistake as Machidori-san. I didn't prepare the PPP, but I will try to my best. And so my presentation title is More Free Hand in Foreign Policy, Abe's Foreign Policy After a Landslide Victory. So my presentation is on the question. So will Prime Minister Abe pursue nationalistic foreign policy more freely after a landslide victory than before? So Abe is known for his nationalistic or right-wing tilted view, and many people are very afraid that the right-wing tilted foreign policy would cause confrontational relations with neighboring countries, so such as China and South Korea. So I will examine this question by reviewing the second Abe administration foreign policy so far. So my assessment is he will be more pragmatic in foreign policy until the third arrow of Abenomics turn out to be successful. That is my assessment. So first, and what did landslide victory do? So as already the other speakers mentioned, but landslide victory in the upper house election eliminated the twisted diet situation and provided political stability for Abe's second administration. So now Abe will possibly maintain his premiership until next election in 2016. So it is said that the twisted diet and the short-lived administration had paralyzed Japan's foreign policy since 2007. So for the past 6 years, there were 6 prime ministers, 6 LDP prime ministers, and including Abe, and also the 3 democratic DPJ's prime minister, he mentioned. So let me first explain what happened between the first and the second Abe administration. So there are major changes in external environment. The first, deteriorated relation with China, South Korea, and Russia. Those are caused by the contested territorial claims, so as you know. And the second, North Korea's missile and nuclear problem was aggravated. So 6-party talk has been suspended. And the third, the Futenma base in Okinawa relocation controversy. This was caused not only impediment to Japan-U.S. alliance, but also anger among Okinawa people. So this is a very difficult problem. So how do we explain poor handling by DPJ government? So the Japanese people are very frustrated with the DPJ government's foreign policy. So first of all, I must say that the DPJ government didn't have much experience in foreign policy, and they tried to be politician first, a politician leading diplomacy. But without support from bureaucrats, it was very difficult for politicians, especially inexperienced politicians, to manage foreign policy steadily. And so, as you know, diplomacy can be analyzed as 2-level game, as Robert Putnam argues. So level 1 game is government-government negotiation to win the biggest possible result. So level 2 game is government negotiation to get domestic supports for its policy. So the range of domestic supports defines states' win set. So short-lived government had difficulty to deal with level 1 negotiation due to lack of long-term strategy. So frequent changing leaders couldn't establish constructive relation with other leaders. And the twisted diet narrowed domestic win set and made level 1 negotiation very difficult. So now, so no twisted diet and political stability. So Abe can enjoy these 2 factors. So these situation can provide the base for more room for Abe to do his diplomacy. So let me next explain Abe's political stance. Why is he considered nationalistic or hawkish? So he often expressed 2 diplomatic slogans. The first is departure from the post-war regime, And the second is proactive diplomacy. So he frequently mentioned two slogans in his first administrations. And under these two slogans, he emphasized the following issues. First, he proposed amendment of the Article 9 of the Constitution to allow for Japan's participation in collective defense and become normal state. And the government has maintained that under international law, Japan has the right of collective self-defense, but cannot exercise it under the Constitution. But he wanted to change this one. And, sorry. And second, Abe has denounced apologizing diplomacy on historical issues. So he suggested that his government would consider revising the corner statement on so-called comfort of women. So this revisionist stance is very clear in his statement. And third, Abe has supported the Prime Minister's visit to Yasukuni Shrine. So he said it is very natural for Japanese leader to offer prayer for those who sacrificed their lives for their country. And fourth, he is known for his tough stance towards North Korea and vowed to resolve the abduction problem. So these four factors, he is regarded as very nationalistic or hawkish. But in his first administration, despite these policy stance, I can say that Abe's policy was turned out to be more pragmatic than were generally expected. A typical example was his policy toward China. Abe was known for his assertive comment on China. But however, immediately after Abe took his office, Abe chose China as the first official visit destination as Prime Minister and established a mutually beneficial relationship based on strategic interest. That is somehow very surprising for Japanese people too. But this stance is very, I can say that he's kind of very pragmatic than what expected. So let me review the second administration. And also I have to add, he also took ambiguous stance about whether he would visit Yasukuni Shrine as Prime Minister. So even in his first administration, he took this kind of stance. So then let me move to the second Abe administration. So I raised three characteristics in foreign policy in the second Abe administration so far. The first is economic first policy, and the second is domestic constraint in security policy, and the third is restrained policy toward China and South Korea. So let me explain first the economy first policy. And this is also explained by other speakers already. The most important agenda for the second Abe administration is economic recovery. So Prime Minister Abe put priority on getting rid of the deflation over foreign policy. So especially until the July election, the Abe concentrated on economic policy because the failure of Abenomics might cause a loss of LDP in the election. And as for foreign policy, his emphasis is largely on economic diplomacy. So he visited so many countries compared to in his first administration. And already he visited many ASEAN countries and Europe, including East Europe, and also Mongolia, and so on. And so, except China and South Korea. So he is very eager to visit the other countries. And so, this is also the very, they said, very security strategic one. But also he is always put the economic first problem. So, his economic first policy. So, especially his frequent visit to ASEAN countries were interpreted as containment policy toward China. But the administration increasingly put more emphasis as ASEAN country as economic partner too. So we have to consider this factor also. And so, actually, not only anti-Japanese sentiment, but also increasing cost in production in China. Japanese company gradually moved from China to ASEAN countries. So this is one of the factors that Abe put emphasis on ASEAN countries too. And so I think that also TPP is his very, how do you say, decisive decision. I think Kume-san already explained TPP is a kind of very difficult decision, but he did so not only in security concern, but also the economic concern too. So Abe's economic first policy seems to be likely to continue until the third arrow of Abenomics. Growth strategy will be successful. And the second characteristic is domestic constraint in security policy. So as for departure from the post-war regime, he has supported the amendment of Article 9 of the Constitution. Because he wanted to strengthen Japan-US alliance, so Japan's participation in collective defense is very good for the Japan-US alliance, he thought. So he wanted the LDP to gain 2/3 of the seat of the Diet in the upper house election, but the result is the LDP failed to get enough seats to propose amendment of the Constitution by itself. So before the election, Abe stated that his government would seek, instead of amendment Article 9 directly, to revise Article 96 first. Article 96 defines the criteria for amending the Constitution. But this was not well accepted by Japanese public. And so Abe also started to establish the National Security Council following the LDP manifest of December 2012. So, but however, these are the two, I have to point the two constraints Abe has to overcome. The first, the coalition partner, the new Komeito party, is very reluctant to change Article 96 as well as Article 9. So the new Komeito party states national debate is necessary for this matter, and it had better take time to do so. So the coalition partner is very reluctant. So the LBT has to persuade the Komeito party in order to achieve the amendment. And the second, Japanese public are not so eager to support for the amendment of Article 9. Actually, before the upper house election, opinion polls conducted by newspapers showed that constituency were more concerned about the economy, just as Kume-san told, than amendment of the Constitution. More than 50% do not support the amendment of Article 96 as well as Article 9. So since there are the tense situation caused by Chinese ships frequent coming in and around Japanese waters, and North Korea's attempts to launch missiles, Abe thought Japanese public would turn in favor of amendment. But in reality, Japanese public are still reluctant to change the constitution. So Abe now seeks to change the government's current interpretation of Article 9 regarding Japanese collective defense right in order to lift a ban on the use of the collective defense right to allow self-defense force to participate collective security activities. So this is, he gradually made concession in this matter. And the third characteristics is restrained policy toward China and, oh, I'm sorry, okay. Okay. Too much concentration. Okay. Third characteristics is restrained policy toward China and South Korea. Despite the hope that the new leaders in three countries would better cope with this issue than previous leaders, the Japan's relation with China and South Korea is still at a low point. And so far, there have been no top leaders meeting with both countries. So three leaders' commitments to territorial issues make it difficult to change their policy stance because changing attitude might cause severe criticism from nationalistic public in each country. This might be the cause we can call the audience cost. And so there is not much room for Abe as well as other two leaders to overcome this stalemate. So only Abe can do is not to worsen the situation and to show the attitude to keep the door open for dialogue without referring to territorial issues. So there are two facts showing his restrained attitude too. The first is Abe decided not to visit Yasukuni Shrine on August 15th, the anniversary of the end of World War II this year. This is a kind of similar attitude to that in the first administration. And the second is on historical issue. In response to question of opposition party in Diet in April, Abe denied Murayama's statement that is Japan's most significant official apology for wartime acts. So Abe's denial was regarded as a typical nationalistic attitude. But even some of U.S. officials expressed their very much concern that Abe's statement would not good for the better relation among East Asian countries. So Abe had to face the criticism not only in domestic politics but also from abroad. So the Osaka Mayor Toru Hashimoto rescued Abe's reputation. So in May, as you know, Mayor Hashimoto, the leader of Japan's Restoration Party, made an unnecessary comment on comfort of women and got very severe criticism from not only Japanese public but also the abroad. So after Hashimoto's statement, Japan Restoration Party's poll number fell drastically. So although Japan Restoration Party enjoyed high popularity as a third party until then. So, okay. And so, so immediately after Hashimoto's mistake, Abe administration stated that the Abe government shared the same recognition as that of previous government. So he just, how they say, made a correction as for his statement. So examining these three characteristics, it is difficult to say that Abe administration freely pursued his nationalistic foreign policy. So I think at this moment, as I told you, I can assess that his policy will be more pragmatic than we expected. So maybe TPP might be one of the big problem for him. So just Kume-san explained. So I agree with his statement. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Kojo. No, I think that your presentation was excellent. So we gave you a little bit more time. There are a number of common themes, I think, that came through. Certainly the difference between Abe 1 and Abe 2 the success so far of some of the Prime Minister's government's economic policies, but the challenges as we move forward, now that he's got his political majority in both houses. And so we have a good 20 minutes, maybe 25, for questions, and I invite questions from the floor, and I think I have one from Dr. Evans.
You may want to group like 3 or 4.
Okay, yeah, we can do that.
Thank you very much to the panelists for intriguing and thoughtful presentations. We have a Japanese Prime Minister speaking with a Canadian Prime Minister very soon. And a lot of us in Canada spend a lot of time trying to understand our Prime Minister and understanding his foreign policy and what makes him tick and what he's going to decide. And as I heard you describing Mr. Abe today, I became optimistic and pessimistic at the same time. Yves Tiebergen talked about a number of risks on the economic side, but let me focus on the political security side. I heard 3 different kinds of explanations for what Mr. Abe's foreign and security policy might look like. And one of them, it's explaining hawkishness. One of them is that it's tactical hawkishness. You act tough with your neighbors and in your neighborhood to achieve purposes in a domestic agenda. Yves Tiebergen put that thesis out. There's another kind of hawkishness that comes from philosophy, what someone genuinely believes about their neighbors and the world they live in. And we heard presentations about Mr. Abe's history of nationalist views, not just recently and not just around immediate issue, but a worldview that seems to lie beneath it. But there's a third kind of hawkishness as well, which is strategic hawkishness. And I think many of us that are looking at Japan and enthusiastic on the economic side, but questioning what's happening on the security, this is not just about the Constitution and the islands. It's a restructuring of the Japanese defense forces, new spending, a new attitude, particularly towards a rising China. And strategic hawkishness can take Japan somewhere between countering China's rise and containing China's rise. So we're all kind of puzzled who Mr. Abe is, which one of those kinds of hawkishness might be in play, and what the predictions might be in future. And this is a question that is not just a Canadian question or an American one. Our Chinese friends are asking this, and particularly our Southeast Asian friends, even after Mr. Abe's recent visit. Thank you.
Before asking Dr. Kojo to maybe start to reply, are there related questions that we could combine with that we've just heard? Yes?
No, it's not related.
Well, are there any related that's on the... Yes, please.
Thank you so much for your presentations. I'm a student of Master of Arts in Asia Pacific Policy Studies in UBC. I have a question, related to a question about the light of self-defense, and which was, I think, Professor Kojo was talking about. I think the Abe cabinet was trying to admit the light of collective self-defense the other day. But my personal feeling is that as long as I'm talking to my young friends, we do not support to admit the self-collective defense. And also most of us are opposing to start a war. But the Abe cabinet is trying to, it seems like it's swinging into the light side. But I think our consensus is opposite to that. But most of the people are supporting his policies. So my question is, so probably almost all the Japanese people are supporting his policies because his economic policies are have been doing great. But probably if his economic policy failed or some other, he's still more aggressive political or security policy has been implemented, probably people will stop supporting him. Probably. That's my question. So thank you so much.
Very good. Maybe we can start and I'll turn to Dr.
Okay. I think it's a very difficult question for me too, because I think many Japanese people are worried about how hawkish he is, and so so far they thought he's more pragmatic than we expected. So we are kind of relieved, but still he is stick to his ideological view, I think. And so especially the budget increase in defense and Coast Guard, and the Japanese public seems to support the budget increase for defense and Coast Guard. Because tense situation surrounding Senkaku Islands, I think it's a kind of real danger of collision of sea that might turn into a kind of very bad situation. So Japanese, the reason why Japanese public supported that budget increase is maybe the capability of the Japan Coast Guard and also the Maritime Self-Defense Force is helpful to hedge against that kind of risk, just to contain the, how they say, to just stop escalation in that, how they say, area. So it's very difficult situation, but that is maybe he wanted to do it. So because if something happens, that might be very dangerous. And I think see as I told that as far as amendment is concerned, I think he gradually, how they say, come back. But I think he wanted to do it. But I think if he wanted to do it, he has to put lots of regulations on how to use, how they say, that kind of collective the defense force to join the collective self-defense. Otherwise, that might be not come true, I think. So some regulation might some regulation has to, how they say, without that kind of regulation, Abe administration couldn't carry out that kind of policy, I think. And so her question is that is, you said that if the Abe failed in economic policy, people will not support Abe or not. I think, yes, he will lose his popularity, I think. So I think his popularity is supported by the economic factor, I think, not by the security factor, I think. So.
Before inviting other questions on this or other matters, are there other comments on defense security issues that Professor Evans has raised?
Quick one. It's interesting that the correlation for, there's three really core relations for Japan. It's the US on one hand and China and Korea. So we have two here that are on the waiting mode. And what I observe, I observe on the Chinese side that there's a downgrading of the intensity, and there's an effort to seek some pragmatism and a way to bring back the relationship to some work. But there's a bit of a dance from what I observe on both sides, and the Chinese still expect a symbolic step from Abe to downgrade on the island dispute, acknowledgement of conflict, or even better, a reprivatization through Japanese foundation or something like this. And currently, there's no way the Abe cabinet will consider it. The question will be, I think there will be a moment next year where Abe will have to make a decision on this. Do you take the symbolic move and do a Nixonian trip to China and you reopen so many possibilities, or do you keep the closed door? And he always has, by the way, the threat on Yasukuni, right? He only postponed it for now, but he has a threat behind that he can always go back if he pissed off with China too much. But So it's a very interesting game of signaling and dancing and expression that's going on. And I think it won't. I assume that something will move next year, but maybe not this one.
Okay, let's go to another question.
Do I have to introduce myself, or can I go to the question right now?
Well, everyone perhaps introduce themselves.
Okay, my name is Bernard Saint-Jacques. I was professor here for 22 years, and I was offered such a beautiful position financially in Japan that I took early retirement from UBC. My question, I think, is to Professor Kume. Because, I'm not sure, because when Mr. Caro introduced the speakers in the back, we could hardly understand. You spoke in a very modest voice. My question is about Abe number 2, nationalism. Would you give us a definition of what you mean by that? What's Abe number 2, nationalism? The present prime minister.
Oh, yeah. Sorry for my not big voice. The second pillar of Abe's policy package, I believe, is that the nationalist agenda. So Senkaku Island territorial issue and some foreign policy, aggressive foreign policy.
What do you mean by nationalism of Mr.
Nationalist issue is the Senkaku territorial issue, Takeshima issue, and so on and so forth.
That's it?
Yeah, and then foreign policies. Okay.
And what?
Foreign policy.
We'd be more precise about foreign policy.
Yeah, so collective self-defense is one issue in the area of foreign policy. But, kind of the policies and the issues which have some nationalist implication, I call it nationalist pillar. That's what I mean.
It's not clear to me what you mean by that.
Pardon me?
Can you give an example of what the national policy is? Huh? Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
because that's just country prime minister. It's not only Mr. Abe.
Uh-huh.
Well, why is it different from the other about nationalism?
Why?
How? In what way?
Yeah,
Is there an actually Takeshima?
Actually, Takeshima is slightly different, I believe, but Senkaku, Abe is, I think, the much, more, how can I say, active position to defend Senkaku. For instance, in the very beginning, he's in the middle of his election campaign, he referred to station some personnel on the island or so on and so forth, which is the very different policy from the traditional, even the LDP government stance. So, I think...
let me say something in that.
Yeah.
If you are so nationalistic as you say, would he foster the American occupation, which has been going on for 65 years? There's no country in the world which has been occupied for 65 years, and a country which pays about 70% of the cost of the occupation. That needs to be contrary to nationalism, because he's supporting the occupation forces very much.
We continue. I'm looking at the clock. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. My name is Incho. I'm a second-year MA student at political science. I want to raise a question to Professor Uchiyama, if I pronounce your name right. And as you mentioned, Abe's commitment to fiscal and financial reforms in his second term, but we have to pay attention to one of the most problem is the increasing budgetary and fiscal limits caused by the increasing large numbers of government debt. So as the Japanese government has increased a lot of humongous numbers of budgetary debt in recent years, which seems impossible to be fixed and compensated according to Japanese GDP growth at that time. So a lot of political scientists and commentators recommended whether to implement the consumption tax reform in Abe's second term and how to implement it, the consumption tax reform has become one of the most important questions to answer. So my question is, do you think to which extent the Abe's government could be successfully implement the consumption tax reform, and what is the positive and negative impacts on the Japanese politics and economics? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. So this increasing the consumption tax is a huge problem for our Japanese government. But yesterday's Nihon Keizai Shimbun, the famous Japanese economic paper, reported that Abe decided to increase the consumption tax to 8% next year. And actually, it was increasing the consumption tax was decided under the Democratic Party government. So Abe just needs to follow that line. But to implement the increase, the economy must be good. And so in order to do that, Abe undertook the massive quantitative easing, or the massive quantitative easing, like American QE, has immediate effect. So I believe Abe knows we should increase the consumption tax to restore Japanese budget health. So he undertook the massive easing of monetary policy. So and I think gradually Japanese people came to know the needs for increasing consumption tax. So it may slow down the economic growth of Japan, but I don't think it will be a huge problem for Japanese politics now.
Very good. Are there related questions to fiscal situation, economic policy? Structural reform? That's right in the air.
So I suppose this question might be for Professor Nyblad, but I'm not sure. So, as we know, the opposition parties in Japan are somewhat marginalized right now. They have a huge majority. The LDP has a huge majority in the lower house, and with the Komeito, they have their coalition in the upper house. So, I guess my question is, in this window, how far will it be possible for Abe to push the LDP traditional supporters, the farmers, and so on, in implementing structural reforms during this window without experiencing that dramatic drop-off that we've seen in many of the other ones, other PMs?
I don't think I'll actually need the microphone. I'll just project. I think the window is actually quite brief, to be perfectly honest. Okay. Okay, yes, sir. I will project into the microphone then. I think Abe's window is brief, and I think that even though he may have what appear to be solid majorities in both chambers, that of course rests on the support of the members of the party, and there are a lot of vulnerable politicians who, as soon as Abe starts to drop in popularity, they will be reluctant to support controversial or unpopular policies. So then we get to the question of, are things like agricultural reform or medical reform truly unpopular enough with key constituents that to stop them? And I don't actually know, and I'll let somebody else, Professor Kume knows more about public opinion than I do. But my sense is that there are some reforms that can be done, and the more quickly they can be done, the more likely they are to be done. things that are quite complicated are already being shelved. I think the constitutional reform, for example, or certain forms of economic restructuring, I think they've been pushed to the back burner because it's just the window's not there anymore. So does someone else want to?
Yeah, this is such an important topic. Perhaps not.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. This is a very important question, but it's a very difficult question to answer. But my impression is that the Prime Minister Abe is very, very tactical in saying his agricultural reform. On the one hand, he is attacking the agricultural cooperative Nokyo as an organization, but he is trying to sell the more, how can I say, hopeful policy or hopeful future of Japanese agriculture. So then, it is very difficult to restructure, but by selling some future scenario, maybe not so certain, but if he can show some optimistic scenario, he may be able to rally the support for the agricultural reform or something. That's my observation.
Let me do one sentence follow-up, which is I think the way he sold the consumption tax is an example of putting together a package that somehow softens the blow. And I think that sort of strategy is the most likely thing to be successful. That's exactly, I think, what Professor Kume is sort of hinting at. Yeah. Yes. So this time. And we shouldn't do it too often, though. It's dangerous.
Do you have anything to add to this?
I think it's a very tough question too, but but my consideration is that it is very difficult for every prime minister, even for every politician, to decide such kind of decisions now. And in the case of Japan, to make matters worse, I think it's a kind of a investment and return kind of relationship. I mean, Japanese voters currently, for example, 100 investment, but getting only 80 or 70 returns in a situation. This kind of situation. So bet was too bad. So so to manage that kind of situation, the packaging is really significant. And what is important for Abe is make great package as much as possible. And up until today, he can manage that kind of situation by packaging policies quite well. And I don't know, but whether or not this kind of great packaging is continuing later. So I think this is the key. It will be the key to the package. The less popular policy choice and the popular policy choices. I don't know what kind of popular choices there is, but in any case, and so this kind of packaging will be matter.
Yes. It's very, very important to implement the structural reforms. But so the other government greatly dependent on the farmers or agricultural corporations for the upper house election in July. So I'm afraid, if he can exert enough leadership to implement those reforms. But in contrast, by the way, I'm optimistic for the reform because the farmers might be not as powerful as expected. So actually, the number of floating voters in Japan is increasing. So the organized interests have less influences now. So if Abe keeps his popularity right now, he may be able to implement structural reforms like deregulation.
Just one very short. There's a couple more factors that are unusual, one that we haven't brought to the table, We talked a lot about backbenchers and the prime minister, but there's a level in between. Traditionally in Japanese politics is all the rivals in the oligarchic structure of the LDP. And in this case, very unusually, Abe has almost no rival. All the rivals are, I mean, he has actually managed to stuff the LDP leadership and the core position of power with a lot of supporters. And there is literally no one that is really waiting in the wings like we always had. And also it's a party that has known massive defeat in 2009. That got massacred. A lot of old leaders have retired. So it's a party that knows that Abe brought it back from destruction. And in a way, Abe has managed on his own with this innovative package of Abenomics to bring back the LDP where no one thought it would be that quick. So I think he's got actually a very good shot within the LDP. He's got leverage over the middle layer. And it's a matter of picking priorities, right? He probably can do 2 or 3 major reforms. And he has tools of councils. Reforms often proceed with special councils, and he's using all the councils as Hashimoto did before, etc. So there is an inventory of potential there. It's just a matter of picking. He won't be able to do across the board, but he has leverage.
I'm going to have to bring this to an end, but if there's one other short question on something that has not been addressed.
I'm a student here at the UBC. My question is not necessarily directed to one panelist, but rather it's an overall question. The Japanese demographic landscape has been changing over the last few years. The workforce is shrinking. It seems to me that long-term prosperity of Japan is usually linked with this issue. Are there any signs that Abe will try to implement reforms, structural reforms regarding immigration policy?
Who would like to answer the easy question?
Simple question. No.
Yes. Well, how do you achieve consensus on one word? Among the panelists, I think time is of the essence, and I bring this to a close. I'd like to thank, first of all, the Institute-based research that organized this very, very interesting, very successful event, and all of our panelists for their preparation. Everyone has given this a lot of thought, and their presentation and their responses. So thank you very much. Thank you to the audience.